There we go. All right. Hey, welcome to the stream. Let's try that again. I'm Ian Douglas. I'm the author of this website. And tonight we got a whole panel of folks. And we'll kind of go around my interface here that we see in the broadcast software. So first we got Gregory Witek joining us from Amsterdam. Really appreciate your time where it's like 2 a.m. or something for you right now. Really, really appreciate you hanging out with us tonight. This whole thing got started with a blog post that Greg started promoting about like, why don't companies hire junior devs? And I'm like, that's fantastic. Dan Moore at the bottom of the screen pointed me to that, and I'm like, this is fantastic. I got to get Greg on my stream. And then the more we started talking about it, the more I'm like, I got to get a whole bunch of these folks. And so we've had Erick García on the stream before. Welcome back, Eric. Dan, you've been here before. Welcome to you as well. And then Monarch Wadia joining us as well. Really appreciate your time. So all of these folks are really big around LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube about like, let's get junior developers jobs. And y'all know me on this stream. That's what I'm all about. Like, let's help people get jobs in tech, especially newcomers to tech. And so really, really appreciate all of your time today. We'll get this kicked off here in just a minute. So let's go around and do like just really brief introductions. We'll start with Greg, and then we'll do Monarch, Eric, and then Dan. And so Greg, give us a little bit of background on like who you are and you know what got you sort of involved in helping people find jobs in tech.
Sure. So I'm Gregory. I'm currently an engineering manager working in Amsterdam for Booking.com. I've been working as a developer for a couple of years, and I spent some time before in Singapore where I got involved in various bootcamps. So I saw firsthand how people struggle getting jobs as junior developers, but also how some bootcamps are way more successful than others. And because I worked with some of them, and also I started hiring junior developers, I got interested in how it works for folks, especially those that don't graduate from top tech schools, and how they overcome the obstacles of getting their first job in the industry.
Awesome, great. Monarch, why don't you give us a little bit of background?
100%. Thank you for having us all here, Ian.
For sure.
I am a self-taught developer. Well, I started off self-taught, and then I got most of my master's degree. It was from Harvard Extension, and I dropped out of Harvard to start my own business. So I'm a typical Harvard dropout, which is hilarious considering I'm self-taught. And I basically 2 years ago, I started my second startup. It's called MintBean, which maybe a few of your viewers know about. And MintBean does hackathons, 95 hackathons so far, more than 300 workshops in the last 2 years. And we get a lot of bootcamp devs and a lot of junior devs. We do hiring hackathons for junior developers. And right now, this month, actually, last month, I started working on a stealth startup to help junior devs find work. And I can't talk too much about that, but yeah, I'll be referring to it once in a while. But super excited to be here. Thank you, Ian.
Awesome, great. And Eric, tell us about. Just remind folks that maybe didn't see the last stream, but tell us a little bit about your background as well.
Sure. I'm a principal engineer, mobile engineer at Prokarma Inc., nowadays called Concentrix, and I have participated in a wide array of projects in which some of my responsibilities have been to manage, but also hire and engineers. And I'm very passionate about helping break the entry barrier for IT, particularly for mobile. So that's why I get involved in the public speaking on this regard.
Awesome. Last but not least, Dan Moore. We were joking before we went live that we need to start renaming the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon to be 6 degrees of Dan Moore, because I think Dan knows everybody and everybody knows Dan at this point. But Dan, give us a refresher on who you are.
Sure. Thanks for having me back, Ian. So I'm Dan Moore. I've been a developer for over 20 years, startup CTO, engineering manager. I'm currently in DevRel for a company called Fusionoth, which is an authentication platform. And how I kind of got pulled into this, helping junior devs find jobs and just level up in general, is I started a blog in 2018, basically cataloging lessons that I wish I'd had when I was starting out. Turned into a book, and as I was talking to people about the book, I talked to a lot of newer developers who really were struggling in a way that senior devs and people that I had levels of experience that I had weren't. And so I think the world needs more software. There's plenty more to be written. And so that's kind of how I got into this area.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. I've been dropping tons of links in chat. So we've got everybody's LinkedIn, a lot of Twitter handles. We linked to Greg's original blog post that kind of kickstarted our whole discussion for tonight, as well as Dan's link for letterstoaNewDeveloper.com. And folks, if you've got other links, like folks on the call here, if you've got other links that you want me to drop, just let me know. But yeah, really appreciate everybody's time for sure. So let's address that elephant in the room. Why don't companies hire junior devs? Let's hear kind of your thoughts and opinions on like why there's hesitation to bring junior devs. Like what's the mindset of typical companies about bringing on a junior dev, and maybe why that's not happening very much. And then we'll get into a topic of discussion around like how do we start changing their minds on that. So Greg, why don't you talk us a little bit about your blog post and sort of the like what prompted the idea of writing out that blog post that you wrote, and then just share some thoughts around that.
Sure. So I think that there are generally two ways to address it. First is why companies in general, like ever, don't invest more in junior developers. This is a situation that has been going on for years. Like we know that the software as a field is growing, but it's always been much, much easier to find a job as a senior developer than as a new developer. And then there is a second thing, that was the pandemic, that completely broke the market for junior developers. And we see it especially in contrast with raising salaries for seniors, right? As a senior developer right now, you dictate your conditions, you name your salary, but also you can say, I'm not going to do more than 3 rounds of interviews. And companies will go for that. If you have 3 or 5 or more years of experience, you decide how you want to interview the companies. But if you're a junior developer, you have nothing to say. You have to follow all the rules. So what prompted the blog post that I wrote was the combination of these two factors, the constant problems for junior developers and the pandemic that put a lot of pressure on hiring, because companies started losing developers, and at the same time, they got more demand, especially for digital products. And with that pressure, they started focusing on what's now. And what's now is that we need more experienced developers. We need more developers that can address the current problems. We need developers that can replace all those that were leaving. And we will not be investing in things that will only bring us benefits 1 or 2 years from now. And junior developers fall, from companies' perspective, they fall into that category of we can do that later. So that's what prompted the original blog post that I wrote.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Monarch, what are your thoughts on, companies and hiring junior devs and things like that?
I think Greg very eloquently described the situation, and all I want to do is I want to add more perspectives to that.
Sure.
I found out, just being on LinkedIn and Twitter and talking to a bunch of people, I found out that the problem isn't just for the tech industry or for software developers. It exists in UX UI design, it exists in sales, it exists in marketing, it exists everywhere. And it comes down to urgency culture, I think. I think it comes down to, we want everything done this quarter because we have quarterly targets to meet. And when you have really aggressive quarterly targets and you don't have strong leadership buy-in, that's a really bad combination to have. A lot of companies, they just look at their HR departments and their talent acquisition departments as sources of talent, and they don't really consider them to be partners at all in the hiring decision. They only consider them to be, okay, this is the kind of person we want, go and get them. It's organizational schizophrenia, unfortunately, I feel. And there are many reasons, but I think the solution is, I think we should focus on the solution, and the solution is education and informing companies about best practices that we've all probably experienced in all of our collective careers, and helping them see the light over here, which is, hey, there is a tech talent crunch. The internet is blowing up, and it's not going to stop blowing up for the next 20 years at least. And nobody is hiring junior developers. What does that mean? That means that we're going to have more and more and more demand, and the supply is going to be growing linearly. And it's not going to keep up because we're not hiring junior developers right now. What does that mean in the next 5 years? That means that no, you're not going to fill that senior developer role. You're not. you're not going to fill probably half your intermediate developer roles. And from a game theory perspective, your best game right now as a company is build a mentorship system, generate buy-in with leadership to build that mentorship system, and start investing in junior people, start investing in bootcamp grads, self-taught grads. Much more to say about that. But basically, start building that culture inside. And if you start with mentorship, and if you start with lightweight, educating new people coming in, giving them a shot, giving them a chance, that's going to set your company up for success for the next 5 years. Otherwise, your talent bottleneck is not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, that's great. Cool. Eric and Dan, anything more to add?
Definitely. The main issue I have found is that sometimes also companies say, what is the value of training junior engineers or freshmen? Like they as it was mentioned before, they want to see the value right away. And unfortunately, also sometimes the talent, after they get to a point where they can meaningfully contribute to the project, they end up getting an offer somewhere else. So there's not a big incentive on training the talent from the ground up. On the positive side, and we'll get to that, there's ways to get around it and to still provide value to the project without having to have this constraint. Because we all have a shortage of talent, and we're fighting over the same people over and over again.
Yeah, for sure. Dan?
I mean, my thoughts, real brief. I think you all have done a great job of describing kind of the problem. But for me, I've spent most of my career at smaller companies, although I've done some stints at large companies. And I think that they each have different strengths and weaknesses when it comes to newer developers. When you're a smaller company, especially if it's like on the edge or growing fast, sometimes you just don't have structure. And it really, you can be a newer developer, but you really need to have kind of initiative, and you need to kind of own things and be okay making some mistakes. So the company needs to be accepting of that. At big companies, I think you do end up having the ability to create a lot more structure. And I think that is someplace that, especially at bigger consulting companies, there's actually this huge opportunity to arbitrage, right? Because I don't know whether any of you have worked at a consulting company, but I can tell you, if you see the rate that your clients are being charged versus how much you're making, you're going to be surprised. But you can do kind of blended teams where the newer developers are executors and there's more senior developers kind of designing and like client interfacing and helping kind of define the problem. But that's kind of jumping more into solutions. I just think that it's worth saying that, like, I have some sympathy to companies that I have myself been at companies where I couldn't absorb the number of junior developers. The company couldn't survive if I took on the number of junior developers that I wanted to help out in terms of hiring.
Yeah. Yep. Hypervisor mentioned in chat, like, it reminds me of The Bachelorette, where all the girls fight over a guy, or, you know, The Bachelor, where it's vice versa, right? Yeah, there's definitely it's funny though, because, you know, kind of speaking to what Monarch was saying, like, there's this talent shortage. Everybody wants to hire senior devs, but nobody's training the junior devs. And kind of Tech Dinosaur actually brought up a good point in chat too, kind of to Eric's point about, if you train up the junior, they're just going to leave in a year or two anyway, but so are your senior devs. And so you have to replenish that supply with somebody. And, you know,
but
I think,
will they, right? Like,
well, will they? Yeah. Right.
If you treat them well, if you treat them like, people have loyalty, especially if you take a chance with a newer developer. You just can't, they're not going to like forego a 50% raise. Right. So you need to like build in that structure to like give them, as they contribute more value to the company, give them more money. Right. And not a 3% bump. Anyway, sorry, I cut you off. Right. I just want to jump in.
No worries. Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
I need to add on to that, because these are all great points. And I need to add to that as well. You don't have to keep them. You can bring in junior devs with the explicit contract, as not written contract, but the explicit and understanding that we're going to train you up. We're going to give you your first shot. And yes, we're going to underpay you for sure, but we expect you to leave in 6 months or 9 months. We expect you to do that. And we're just going to give you that first bump into the industry. That strategy allowed me to hire 15 bootcamp grads in 2 years as basically a small shop. We grew up to 10 people at one point, all the dev capacity that we needed. I trained up all the devs on TypeScript, React, Express, Postgres. Claire, who's working with you, she was doing CI/CD, team leadership, TypeScript, Express, React, brilliant developer. And all she needed was somebody like me to just give her some of my knowledge. And she had it in her to become an excellent developer by herself. In 9 months, she was looking for a job. She looked at Postman and said, "Hey, I'm looking at Postman." I said, "Okay, let me help you with your resume. Let me help you with interview prep, and you go for it because you deserve it." And that works really well.
It's interesting to think of that perspective of you expect them to leave. Therefore, like you and they know that like, hey, we expect you to kind of move on in a brief amount of time, where a lot of companies, they want you to stick around. They don't want you to leave. They want, like, if they're, my first job out of college, just to give you some perspective, I left after 13 months. And in my exit interview, I was called a waste of resources because the company invested in me and I left after 13 months. And I'm like, no, your management is why I'm leaving. And this exit interview is just cementing and reinforcing the fact that I don't want to work for a manager that's going to call me a waste of resources. Yeah, I think, it was pretty awful. But at the same time, I spent 13 months in like kind of a customer support / pre-sales engineering, which, really made me a better developer in the first place. We had a good question come by in chat. What if your company promoted or recognized your growth and then updated your pay to reflect that? And I agree with Dan. I think it can instill some amount of loyalty. At the same time, like, a lot of companies can't compete with like, that 50% bump like you were talking about. One thing that I actually had at a previous job, the person that ran the business recognized like, hey, if you're going to leave for that 10-15% bump, I'm going to give you that 10 to 15% bump, but I'm also not going to make you wait a year to get it. And they basically dished out like a 1 or 2% increase like every 2 months. And so every 2 months, we got a little increase on our check. We got another increase on our check. We got another increase on our check. I think that instilled more loyalty to stick around because you didn't have to wait that full year to get that bonus. And, we see this on LinkedIn quite a lot. It's like, oh, it's January. Suddenly everybody's looking for jobs because they were just waiting for the new year to get that bonus from the end of last year. And now that I got that bonus check, I'm out. But if they leave early, they don't get the bonus. And so a lot of people are just hanging around for that pay bump, hanging around for that bonus to kick in, and then they bail anyway. But I think if you can kind of do that more incrementally, I think that's also going to instill some amount of loyalty no matter what level you are. But I appreciate that thought. Zedster the Mayu, not sure how to pronounce your username, but I appreciate the comment for sure. RC Maniac, good to see you in chat, says company promotion is sometimes slow and entices looking elsewhere. I agree. And that's a whole separate topic of like, why do companies wait so long? Like, why does it have to be an annual review? Why can't it be a quarterly review or, something more frequent? Cool. So yeah, go ahead.
The biggest reason why, the biggest reason why developers left awesome. The biggest reason why developers left Mintbean, those 15 developers, I think more than 6 or 7 of them cited you don't pay enough, and that was part of the agreement. If we had funding and if we were a bigger company, I would have made sure that objection was overcome. And that is by far the biggest reason why junior devs leave. But you know what? By hiring junior devs, investing in them and training them, that builds loyalty by itself. And then if you can back it up with the money, don't look at junior devs. I mean, unless you're a small bootstrap startup like me, don't look at junior devs as cheap labor. Look at them as a way around the tech talent crunch. Look at them as soon to be intermediate developers that you're going to invest in and pay them market rate salaries. Because in those 3 months, you can spend those 3 months looking for an intermediate or senior dev and pay them whatever crazy amount they want, or you can invest in a junior dev and pay them the same amount. But you're going to have somebody who's going to stick with you for 7-8 years if you just treat them right, because they're gonna have that loyalty with you.
Interesting.
I mean, you gave them their first shot. Why would they want to leave?
And even with senior devs, like building on top of that, even with senior devs, there's a period where they have to learn about your process, about your project, right? No matter how senior experience, you still have to learn about the company. So
Yep.
there's still going to be a period where no matter the level, they have to adapt and
Yeah.
adjust.
I heard this at a tech conference one time. Like whenever somebody's using your software for the first time, but I agree with kind of Erick's sort of mindset right now of even when you join a company as a new employee, like I'm experiencing right now, everybody's a new dev. Everybody's a junior dev effectively when you start that role because you've got so much stuff to learn. You got to learn process. You got to learn the names of your teammates. You got to learn how they do things and go find the documentation and how to implement things the way they want it implemented and so on. Greg, any thoughts kind of circling back to you around like your blog post and so on, like any sort of follow up on that?
Yeah, so I think it all goes back to treating companies as systems, right? Companies will always act in their own self-interest, which means producing more money than they spend. And all the decisions are based on that, I think. So why they don't hire junior developers? Because it is a cost, right? Sure, your senior developer costs more, but your senior developer doesn't need so much attention when onboarding. It is like, no matter how good you are as junior, if it's your first job, there are so many things that you just don't know about that for the first couple of months, not only you will not produce value, but you will occupy other developers' time. So it is a cost and it is a plunge in the productivity for the company. Especially small companies will struggle here, right? If you have a company where you have 3 senior developers, you will hire 2 new people, then basically nothing gets done for the first couple of weeks. So I think that when we talk about why companies should hire more developers, I think that this needs to be addressed, right? How do we create an economic incentive for a company to start hiring less experienced folks? Because if you say, yes, if you treat them well, if you start paying them more, then they will stay longer. Yes, but if I pay them more, then I can just already hire someone who I will pay like mid-level developer. I will pay the same amount of money and they will be just onboarded faster, right? So the question is, what justifies, from my perspective as a company owner who needs to balance the sheets, what justifies that investment? If it's a lottery ticket that I hire someone and maybe they will stick for 2 or 3 years, or maybe they will leave after 1 year, right? It's for me like either loss or win. So I think that it all comes to them, how to make sure that companies can provide to the community, can hire junior developers, can train them, and at the same time not make a loss. At the same time, it can be a positive thing for them.
Sure. And for smaller companies, that's really hard to do because they're trying to get off the ground. They're trying to raise their funding. They've got to do a lot with a little. So yeah, that's an interesting perspective. In my last director of engineering role, I actually took down a listing for a junior dev. I really wanted to hire a junior dev. I had to take it down because I didn't have enough senior devs on my team to support them. And I would be doing them a disservice of hiring them and trying to pull people off of deadlines and things like that and try to stretch deadlines in order to give them the support that they needed. Because I'm not just going to hire someone on my team and be like, all right, good luck. Like it's my duty to them to make sure that they have support, but it's also my duty to the business to spend as little money as possible to get the job done. And I get that there's a balance in there, but at the same time, I think fostering that loyalty is definitely good, but also, as others have mentioned, you get to kind of shape that junior engineer into what you want them to be. You get to kind of form them into the model employee of like, this is how we want you to follow the process. This is how we want you to do documentation, do your testing, do blah, blah, blah. And so you then get to use them kind of as that example of, hey, everybody, like everybody knew that we hire, we want to be like this person and sort of set the bar there.
I had a similar situation where I joined a company that didn't hire junior developers, and I told them I will join you, but I'm starting hiring juniors, and they say, okay, we're fine with that. But then when I joined, 2 or 3 senior developers left, and first thing for me was, okay, I have to fill that gap, right? I cannot start hiring juniors without having replacement for that seniors, and that set me back for like 6 months because it was so hard to hire seniors, to round them up, to make sure that they are, that they are productive enough so that I can start hiring juniors. And for smaller companies, that small setback, like losing 1 or 2 experienced people, this takes months to get back on track.
Yeah. RC Maniac,
I think.
sorry, just real quick,
Go ahead,
Monarch. So RC Maniac said in chat, they were basically saying, they brought someone on the team that didn't have Git or GitHub experience, and they had to kind of slow things down and teach them those things. I mean, everybody's going to be joining your team with some sort of skill gap, but the hard technical skills you can teach people. Like, you don't know that language, we'll teach you the language. You don't know the framework, we'll teach you the framework. You don't know Git, we'll teach you Git. That's fine. What I find is way harder to sort of teach and train people into are the people skills and the collaboration and how you communicate and like the process of how you get your work done and how responsive you are and like what kind of response you give. Those are harder things to sort of teach and train and mold. And so I think no matter who you hire, you definitely need to pay attention to the people skills and what we call soft skills, although in development, they're just as important as the actual technical skill. But if there's a gap in the technical skill, I mean, train them on that skill. I mean, no matter what level they're coming in at, everybody's going to have something to learn. Go ahead, Monarch. Sorry.
Yeah, there's this concept of technical debt in coding, and technical debt is, just to recap, you can go faster in the short term at the expense of the long term because you're going to have to go back and fix that code in the long term. But you can take out that loan from the future, and you can take that speed from the future and you can use it now. You can cut corners now. You're just going to have to pay it back with interest later. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is that we have organizational debt in a lot of our companies where we've hired just seniors and we've hired them on, and all we have is seniors now and intermediates, but we don't have succession planning. We don't have a high bus factor. One person leaves, we're set back by several months. The only way to get over that is to have a mentorship culture and hire juniors. But people don't think that way. And I think as engineers, I think it's useful to have metaphors that you can apply to multiple situations. We need to apply the technical debt metaphor to our organizations. We need to look at our organizations and say, do we have succession planning? Do we have backup plans in case something goes wrong? And if we need to scale tomorrow, can we hire bunches and bunches of juniors once we have that need? And can we scale up without having to rely on senior developers? Nobody talks about this because it's not engineering, it's organizational, and nobody talks about it. But this is how organizations need to be built in order to be resilient enough to scale in the long run.
That's an interesting way to think about it, for sure. Yeah,
that is very true. I have found that in many projects, people tend to rely on a particular person. And if anything happens, it could be, sickness, it could be a temporary absence, it could be like they got an offer somewhere else. And then the whole project is set back. The whole company doesn't meet the goals or expectations because of this oversight. So yes, I love the word that you use, resilient. We need to not only build resiliency on our systems, but also in organizations and projects.
Yeah, I would just chime in and say two things. One is I think juniors do help with hygiene, right? Like they help with like making sure documentation happens, making sure stuff is automated, making sure stuff makes sense. Because once you've been in a world for a while, sometimes you don't see that. And I love those new eyes, especially that new devs bring. The second thing is I just want to kind of mention three things that I've seen that actually work to get new devs hired in my experience. And the first is, you hire people and this addresses Greg's point, you hire people for a role that they can provide instantaneous value for the company. An example of that is customer service or QA or software development, engineer and test, or sales engineer, where there's not an expectation that they can come in and contribute to the code base, but they can learn a code base, they can learn an area. That's one. I think I already mentioned consulting, where you can come in and, put someone through a 2-week training or, a month training, and then they can start being billable, which immediately adds to your bottom line. And the third is, and this was with a consulting company, we actually implemented this, de-risking the hire of a new dev by doing it on a contract basis. And, contract to hire definitely pushes risk onto employees. I totally get that. But we actually had a pretty good uptake of people interested in this because they were willing to work basically 40-hour week-ish employee for, I don't know the time span was 3 months or something like that. But that significantly de-risked the company's options, because after 3 months they could either just let the employee go if it wasn't a fit, or if it was, then they had somebody who was trained up in their systems that they could make a full-time employee.
Yeah, it's a good thought. And Zui mentioned in chat too that they're in a similar kind of role now, where the company brought them on. Zui got a job, and they brought them on to basically learn for the first year. And you're being trained to then take on a bigger role. I think in a bigger company that's totally feasible. You've got the revenue, you've got the runway, but Monarch, for example, in a small startup, you haven't got that kind of cash. You haven't got that kind of plan and so on. So I think a lot of that does depend on the size of the company, the stability of the company, but it still comes back to the leadership and the organization of what does the leadership want to do? Because I think, go ahead, Monarch. Go ahead.
Oh, I was about to contribute that even
sorry,
for
Eric,
smaller, even with smaller companies, the having interims you can make it work, especially with a strong leader. I actually had my own startup about a decade ago, and when the funds are when you're struggling making its end on the very first years, when you're trying to build clients and build new systems and build your code base, when you can train the talent, you can also make things work, even with junior developers, as long as they're committed. I think it also depends on who are you hiring and where are you hiring from. But even with junior developers, if they have the drive and the energy to get things done, and they're willing to go the extra length, you with a strong leader, you can actually complete projects successfully, because they have this intensity that they bring with them to learn, but to do right. So that is also something you can leverage. As if you focus their energy, their skills the right way, they can bring amazing results, and you can have a full team with the same salary of a single engineer and get more accomplished. So I can say that even though it's rough and you need to be um, very carefully mentoring and being close to the project, it can get done. And I had great success with that in the past.
It was the same for me, if I can add. I don't know what's the English term. Is it a litmus test? It's this paper that shows you. So for me, the junior developers are like a litmus test of organizational culture. If junior developers can thrive in your organization, it means that it's done well, right? If junior developers can do tickets, can take a feature and implement it, it means that the documentation is clear enough, the code is clear enough, the requirements are clear enough. If they can onboard based on the documentation that is written, it means that the documentation is maintained well. And I think that they provide a lot of value in that sense. Also, just wanted to add, someone wrote on the chat about big organizations that are catching up now with hiring juniors. I think that's interesting that the big organizations are those that don't need really that many junior developers, because they have money to throw at every developer on this planet, and yet they have the structure in place to bring the best talent out of universities, bootcamps. They are prepared for that. And I think, well, they have resources for that, so they can do it. But I think here's where the smaller organizations need to catch up, because the smaller organizations, the ones that don't have so many resources, are the ones that are being affected by this crunch right now on the market. So they need to catch up, and they need to figure out how to put this structure in place, so that not now, not in a year, but in a couple years, they have this healthy pipeline where junior developers are not an ad hoc thought, but just part of a long-term plan, how to keep the company running.
Yeah, it's good. And I think, kind of that litmus test, I think also comes back to what Monarch was talking about, kind of the idea of technical debt, because that is technical debt at that point. If your process and your documentation isn't up to speed where anybody new coming in can immediately start contributing and understanding how to contribute and contribute well without needing all of the eyeballs on, did they write the code properly? Did they do the pull request properly? Did they, run all the tests properly? Did they do all this stuff properly? Like, that's its own level of technical debt. And if your company is scrambling to meet deadlines and so on already, it doesn't matter what level of developer you're bringing on your team, you're going to slow everything down, because they're not going to be doing things properly anyway. And you've got to kind of pause and train them on that. and go, well, why did that happen? Why did we get that bug in production? Well, maybe your onboarding process wasn't complete enough. And I think that does point at more kind of that organizational sort of habit.
It's a really interesting space, and it's a really beautiful space to be in as a startup. This stealth startup that I wish we had launched yet. We're launching in like end of February, but the stealth startup that I'm working on, our entire hypothesis is companies are wrong about everything when it comes to hiring developers, which is, I think it's a safe bet for most companies, because companies focus on building product, on giving their customers great service. And that's what they should focus on. But when it comes to hiring developers, because you don't specialize in that, because there are natural conflicts between talent acquisition and hiring managers, what ends up happening is a huge amount of miscommunication between talent acquisition and hiring managers. And I think all of us know what I'm talking about over here, where you say, as a hiring manager, you might say, yeah, I need a junior developer, anyone from 0 to 5 years of experience. And then the TA goes and puts on junior developer, 5 years of experience. And then everybody on LinkedIn gets mad at your company. So what we're doing is we're grabbing the best junior developers in the market, agnostic of what your TA does or what you want. We're just gathering a large pool of developers, junior, intermediate, and some seniors, and we're packaging them together in teams. And we're providing juniors and intermediates that are very difficult to actually scout and find. It's actually really hard to find good juniors. And we embed senior developers inside the team to help mentor them. So you don't have to mentor them. You just talk to the senior developer. They get to know your stack. They get to know your code. And then they mentor the 5 or 6 juniors that they've hired, that we've brought onto your team. And it's just a massive way to scale up fast. You don't have to go and do the hiring, because we already have them. We've vetted them. I vet them. The first stage of the interview process is a technical assessment, pair programming. So we have engineers going out there and scouting developers the right way, the way they should be scouted. And then we have people training them. And I really, really hope that the market likes it, because I know for a fact that it solves problems. Startup problems being, how do you convince companies to do this? That's kind of my problem right now, is how the hell do you convince companies that investing in intermediates and juniors is worth it? And it's an interesting space.
Yeah, and Zed brought that up in chat a few minutes ago. Refusing to hire juniors exacerbates the problem, and we talked about that early in the stream. The seniors in the company are so inundated with work that they're overworked, which makes them leaves even more work for the remaining devs. Juniors would at least be able to join, and even if the seniors don't have that much time to train, the juniors can be given small tasks, which could then over time help stuff kind of take off from there. So yeah, I agree with that. Well said. And Zui said, going off of something Greg said, what does the panel believe the small steps and long-term steps that these small companies can do to make this happen? I think Monarch just covered some of that, and someone also kind of chimed in and said, like, add some logging and metrics around like what that onboarding process is, like having some sort of like onboarding check-in of how well are you onboarding? Are you onboarding the way we expected you to onboard? Are you onboarding the way you expected to onboard? So I think definitely having those regular conversations, I think is going to be really important too. And then last one, RC Maniac said in chat, my last company used to get tons of interns, and if they were good, we offered them full-time jobs, but then higher ups changed budgeting and they said no more interns. My team was sad. We basically stopped growing for over a year. And then when other people left, we said, well, we need 2 devs to replace that one. And then we didn't. So, it gets hard when you kind of overload your senior devs with work that when they do leave, they're taking lots of domain knowledge, but they're probably doing things, whether it's efficiently or not, but they're probably doing several people worth of work when you think about the new people that you'd have to bring in to train up to cover, all of that stuff, because somebody with a lot of domain knowledge left. So yeah, excellent points. Thanks for dropping that stuff in chat.
So I wanted to kind of just chime in a couple of things. First is what Eric was saying about small companies. The example I gave of the Prove It contract, that was at a consulting company that was 15 people. And so, I think the change can start at companies as small as that, right? Because when you can structure things so that junior developers or new developers provide value, this gets back to the quarterly view that I think Monarch mentioned earlier. But if you can provide value kind of right then, if you can structure things so that they can provide value, then suddenly it starts to make more sense. Or no, maybe it was Greg said that. I'm sorry. The other thing I wanted to say is, Greg's initial blog post that brought us all together was really talking about there's a tragedy of the commons. And I was thinking about that in economics, when there is a tragedy of the commons, there's kind of two straightforward ways to deal with it. In case that people don't know what the tragedy of the commons is, it's where you everyone fishes and there's plenty of fish for everybody, and then suddenly people realize I can get a bigger boat, I can take more fish, and everybody levels up and gets more boats and gets more boats and gets more fish, and then there's no fish left at the end of the day, where fish are the metaphor for senior developers here. But if you can do that, the two ways that I've seen it work with tragedy of the commons are privatization, right, which is where you encircle the commons and you give people, like, people own little bits of the ocean, and the corresponding thing here would be apprenticeship programs where you have this commitment, right? This is almost like the way it was 50 years ago, where I'm going to invest 5 years of work into you as the new developer, and you're going to stay with us for 10 years. I don't know that we can shift that. That's a societal shift. That'd be hard. Government action is another way to do that, right? Licensure, guilds, certifications that make things a little more transferable between companies. But I don't see any easy way out of it from that perspective. I just thought it was an interesting view to take around tragedy of the commons.
Yeah, for sure. And one downside to this whole thing is we can't force people to stay. Like, we can't say, hey, we're going to hire you, we're going to invest in you, we're going to put all this training in you, and we expect you to stay. I often caution people on the stream that come by and they're like, hey, I found a company that wants to hire me, but they want me to stay for 2 years, and if I leave, I have to pay them back a bunch of money. It's like, no, don't take that job. You don't want to ever take a job where you owe somebody money to leave. Right. That sounds like slavery to me. Like, don't do that. Don't do that. Right. Yeah.
But you can flip the script. You can do it the other way, where you incentivize people to stay. When the more they stay, the more value they get. Because also the other side of the coin is, if they're happy with your company and the project that you're giving them, every time that they change project or go to new companies, there's a risk. So there's also an incentive to stay around and keep doing what they're doing. So you have them engaged enough and you're paying them well, they should not, there's no reason for them to change or to go somewhere else. Even if they offer a 50% increase, if you keep building on top of their salary, they will get there, and they know that. So maybe they will be losing on the short term a little bit, but on the longer term, you're providing the infrastructure proven and tested that they will get there. So that's also an incentive.
I think that's important to add, that people rarely start looking for a new job just because of money. Usually money comes on top of that. And if a recruiter comes to you and offers you 50% raise, then you will start thinking, okay, maybe, that's a good point. But people rarely start thinking, oh yeah, I want to make more. Let's see what's on the market. Usually the search for a new job starts because you're bored, because you stopped growing, because your manager just pressures you to work overtime, and you decide, okay, maybe this culture is not for me. Maybe it's time to look for something where I am more appreciated. So Eric, I totally agree with you. If people feel appreciated, they want to stay. And I worked in a small startup that paid nowhere near top of the market, but we had junior developers that stayed for 3-4 years. They became senior developers. They started mentoring others just because of the company culture and because they were appreciated. They were growing. They saw that they were taking more responsibilities. They were given bigger projects, bigger responsibilities. So even though they had offers from other companies for 20-30% more, they saw, I still can grow here and I enjoy coming to work every day. And that's, for a lot of people, it's worth more than that 20 or 30% on top of what you're already making.
Yeah, we should not underestimate the power of, I love working here every day. I love my teammates. It's very strong motivator. Some of the projects I have participated with, I got engaged so strongly with the team that even though offers came along the years, I keep rejecting, because the synergy and the goal that we have on making the world a better place through technology resonates very strongly with me. So not even a strong incentive could move that. So That is also a very important point.
Well, and how many of us?
There's also.
Oh,
go ahead. Go ahead.
Real quick, how many of us have moved and like the grass seemed greener over the other side and it wasn't? Right. Like I think, and that's something that like for all the new developers out there watching the stream, be aware of that when you find someplace that's good that fits, there's a lot. I don't want to say there's not more. There's this number X, and X always varies according to your life circumstance. But once you have X, you don't need more than X. I mean, more than X is nice. No one says I'm gonna turn down money, but like there's risk. There's real risk in moving.
Sure.
So,
yeah.
Right.
Go ahead.
30% increase is not worth like not being happy with your everyday basis. Like if the people you're working with feel more like part of your family, like that's something that needs to be valued, and it's very hard to find. So
definitely, there's also a failure by our public institutions to invest in developer education, and thankfully it's being solved by private industry. Right now, every single year across every single, and I actually went to this website that's run by the US government and I pulled the stats. It had a really complex query system. I selected for the last several years every single degree program that possibly could be teaching programming. So information sciences, software engineering, computer science, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I found that at the undergrad level, 3-4 year degree programs and diploma programs from colleges and universities, they only graduate about 70 to 80,000 people. I forget the exact number. I'm pretty sure it's 80,000 as of 2020. They only graduate 80,000 people, and that number grows by about 9 or 10% year over year. Boot camps, on the other hand, they're growing by 40% year over year. And as of 2020, they already had 50,000 students graduating year over year. 50,000 students every year. And that number is growing by about 40% every year. So what we're seeing right now, and I think every single year, I think all of us are slowly experiencing this, but I want everybody listening to this call to just pay attention in the next year or so, or 2 years. Notice how the conversation starts being more in focus around boot camps and less in focus around universities, because the boot camps are actually providing way better talent, better trained, and at a faster rate, less cost than universities are right now. And this might be still maybe an unpopular opinion among many circles, but this conversation is going to change in the next 4 years. And we're going to see universities being eclipsed by 12-week programs that teach you how to code and slam you into work. And you're actually productive and you're actually possibly better skilled than the average university grad. And I can go into the reasons why, I can go into why I won't. But I think the tragedy of the commons is going to be solved by the bootcamp sector. Like, that's my honest take on it.
Yeah. And just two things real quick, just so we're going to take just a quick pause here. The first response I have to that is not enough companies trust boot camps, because the boot camps are so varied in what they teach and how they teach, and kind of circling back on all of this of like, how do we trust that education? Because there's no sort of licensing and whatever. But I want to just really quickly address something that came up in chat. So someone named Blake's 2021 asked for some advice, like, what's the job hunt going to be like for somebody brand new trying to get into tech, and what sort of advice would we give them? I mean, my whole stream is like, I want to give you advice on how to get into the tech industry, but right now we got a whole panel of folks that would love to just pour advice into your head on like what you can do. And I think that this would be a good time to kind of pivot the conversation a little bit, because we've talked about like the problem. What are some solutions? Like, how can we start to address within companies and try to encourage that? I think part of me wants to like start organizing from a community perspective. And I talked about this, Dan introduced me to someone named Mandy that runs a podcast, and I did kind of a 1 hour rant on, wouldn't it be great if as a community we could get together and say, this is how interviewing should happen, this is how hiring should happen in the tech industry, get a couple of companies to try it, and in public say, this is what worked well, this is what didn't work well, and iterate on that as a community, as a tech industry community, publicly say, this is what the interview process should be. and then have companies start to adopt that and give feedback on like what's working well about that proposal as far as that goes. But let's start to pivot that conversation. Like, what can we do to start convincing companies to take a chance on entry level devs? Not just like the idea of juniors. So whether it's internships or, you know, that first job in tech or just anybody with less than 2 years of actual professional experience, what can we start to encourage those companies to do to say like, hey, you need to take a chance on these people, so that we can make this job hunt for entry level devs less hell? Eric, any thoughts?
Yes, I actually have been advocating for this for several years on the different projects and companies I have worked on. And I have had great success when you give a reason, or you give the a way of having the developers or the new hires bring value, immediate value to the company. And I have found that if you assign it, as it was mentioned before, to QA, like to the testing efforts, when you have you in the testing side, in unit testing, like for example, one of the beauties of it is it's very easy to measure. It's not code that is going to end up in production. So if something goes wrong, it's going to stay within your development environment, and there's not a big entry barrier. It's very, uh, it's not, I wouldn't say easy, but the entry barrier is not as high as having to do production level code that might impact millions of users everywhere, right? Right now, you're talking about code that tests code, and the outcome ideally is higher quality. That is easy to measure. You can see your code coverage, you can see and you can give workshops, and there's a lot of information out there. So with a strong leadership, if you focus the resources there, they will get also familiarized with the code base itself while they're actually contributing. So in a matter of 3 to 6 months, they could be actually ready to start doing production code because they know the code base, they have been working indirectly with it. So that brings a lot of value, like immediate value. Within a month, you're going to have someone already contributing.
Yeah.
If I can
Yeah,
add,
sure.
I think what Dan said before about the strategy of the commons, that it has usually two solutions, either privatization or government intervention. I think this will not work here. But I think what will happen over time is that a lot of companies will have to accept we cannot afford the best developers, we cannot afford more experienced developers. And that's the eventual solutions. It will not happen yet. It might take a couple months, it may take a year until all this situation with this crunch comes down. But companies will figure out, okay, right now we know where we are, we know where we want to get. We cannot afford to keep poaching developers. We have to have a long-term plan. So I think the solution is money. Companies will figure out, okay, we have to start investing in junior developers because over time this makes sense financially. So I think that will be like the end game here. But in terms of what developers can do now, the early stage developers without experience, what they can do now in order to find a job, I think the first thing is just prepare that it will take some time. It's still a very dynamic market and it's harder to find a job now. If you make your search sustainable, if you make sure that you can sustain yourself for the next 6 to 12 months while searching for the job, you will land it. It might take more time than you expect, but if you know that, okay, I'm financially stable, I can afford to spend some more time, you will eventually land a job. There is a place for everyone in this industry. Everyone who wants to get there can get there eventually. It's just a matter of time.
It's good.
I would just like to chime in real quick, and I say I've actually had friends who were 10 or 15 years in the industry who are still having a hard time finding the right job, right? So it is kind of this weird multi-dimensional matching problem, and so it's harder for new developers. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to say that it's not, but everyone has a hard time finding a job sometimes. And things you can do as a new developer, some of this is retread of what I said before, but like change your criteria, right? So instead of being like, I need to get hired by a FANG, right, which is Facebook, Netflix, Apple, Amazon, be like, okay, I'm going to be hired by a second tier company, or I'm going to be hired by a consulting company, or instead of being like, I have to get a dev job, I'll tell you, the easiest time to find a job is when you have a job already. And that could be an internal transition, or it could be you're just how do I put this politely? You're much more appealing to other employers when you're currently employed, because there's this like halo effect, and it's crappy, and it's not necessarily a fair judgment of you, but employers have to like move through and like make their hires as quickly as they can with a very limited amount of information. So a piece of information like, yeah, they were employed by some other company that I've heard of, is useful.
I would love to add a little bit on top of that. Some piece of advice on how to land the first gig. How do you get up over that entry barrier of you have to have a job, or you have to have a little bit of experience to be attractive to new projects? There's a thriving startup community all around the world, and there's always a startup willing to have you collaborate in some way, somehow. So if you engage with the community and just go out there and say, this is who I am, this is what I know, and you start like building your portfolio from the ground up, you will land a job even faster than others. Like in every city that I have been, there's always like a small either organization or like, I don't know if I should promote particular platforms, but I have found great success on Meetup. I have found great success on just finding on the social media where do developers gather, and usually there's going to be CEOs or there's going to be hiring managers just out there talking about a topic, and they open themselves usually at the end of a presentation to, I'm hiring, just talk to me. And that's also a very powerful way of getting yourself in the doorstep.
And this is something that I mentioned in chat a couple of minutes ago, because someone was asking for this exact advice of, how do I network and things like that. And I dropped in chat, going to a meetup and giving even a 5-minute lightning talk of, this is my experience with fill in the blank. Like, don't go to a meetup and give a talk on this is how to do something with blank, because everybody's going to tell you why you're wrong. But if you just go in, especially for entry-level devs, give a 5-minute talk on, this was my experience implementing React. This is my experience with Python. This is my experience with GitHub. 5-minute talk. And at the end of it, similar to what Eric was just saying, instead of I'm hiring, to say I'm looking for a job. By getting up and giving a talk, people are already going to kind of perceive that you've got some kind of expertise or some kind of knowledge. And if you can show code samples and you can talk about your experience, you don't have to be great at public speaking. And a lot of meetups are remote, and so you can be in a comfortable environment, and you don't physically have to go somewhere to give that talk. It's a great way to network with people. It's a great way to kind of get your name out there, get some public speaking experience. They're called meetups, not show-ups. That's something I like to say a lot on the stream. Like, you need to go to meet people. You need to network. That's definitely going to make your job hunt a lot easier than just blind applying. I've had a lot of people come by the stream and they're like, I've applied to like 300 jobs and I've gotten 2 phone calls. It's like, because you're shotgunning the same resume out to everybody. You're not including a cover letter. You're not customizing anything about your portfolio to target those companies. You're not networking with any of them. You're just like, you're playing it like it's a numbers game. Like, the more jobs I apply to, the more likely I'm going to get a job. Where I think you can kind of shift that strategy and say, I'm going to target these companies by getting to know them and talk to them about it. But this does kind of go back to our overall question of, how do we get companies kind of bought in on this too? Because you can go to meetups and you can give those talks and you can network with them, but at the end of the day, the company has to be willing to bring on an entry-level dev. So yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that. Like, how do we even start to shift that mindset a little bit?
I think the value of the meetup is also that you meet people that are not necessarily online. Because online, you see all those people, like you see lots of people with tons of followers on Twitter, you see bigger companies. But if you go to a local meetup, you meet local companies that do projects for local clients, and you meet them face to face, right? And that builds a real connection. And I always tell people, talk to smaller companies. They might not necessarily look for someone actively, but they meet you, they know you, and they say, hey, let's do something together. I got my first job in a company that was 5 people. Nobody knew that company, but that helped me to get into the industry. And from then on, as you all guys say, once you get a first job, it's much, much easier. So your first job doesn't have to be a top company. It can be any job over that. Over the time, it becomes easier.
Yeah, your first job is probably not going to be your dream job, and it doesn't have to be your dream job. It doesn't have to be your only job. It's a stepping stone to whatever that next job is going to be. So just go take any kind of job. And I tell people on the stream too, if that first job has to be a QA role or a customer support role, like do that. And then in the next interview, talk about how that makes you a better developer. Because I took that QA job, it made me a better developer because I have a better understanding of system organization and unit tests and how all these things play together. Or I took that support role to have a better idea of like user empathy, and I'm going to be a better developer now because I understand more what the users are going through. So go get any kind of job. You can always spin that story however you want to go get that next job as a developer. So that first job doesn't even have to be a full-time development job. But if you do that, just make sure you're keeping your development skills sharp as well. Sorry, I feel like I was interrupting someone there that wanted to chime in. Go ahead, Monarch.
Yep. Just these are just amazing points, and every single one of these points is amazing. And I've used many of these strategies myself as a junior dev, and I think I can vouch for everything that was said. I really want to point out Dan's little throwaway thing. He said it's a multi-dimensional matching problem, and I want to kind of bring us back to that because there's one of the most common things I hear from junior devs is I get a lot of conflicting advice on the internet. Some people say go network, other people say go apply for jobs. Some people say take that support job or the QA job. Other people say don't take it and wait for the dev job. And one thing I kind of like to tell people is, hey, I'm going to use that phrase, Dan, multi-dimensional matching problem. I'm going to use that. I basically tell them, look, every single person's situation is different. And the job hunt is actually way more complicated than you might think. It looks to you like you're applying to jobs and networking, but really what's happening is it's kind of like you're running through a gauntlet, and you could fail at one of multiple steps, and you don't know where you're going to fail. You could fail at the resume screen. You could fail at not applying to enough jobs. You could fail at the interview. The non-technical interview, you could fail on the phone screen, you could fail in the technical interview. And the pattern that most developers have is there's always one, usually it's only one, but 1 or 2 points in your process, you're always going to meet the same failure point over and over again. And you need to figure out as soon as you can what your specific failure point is. If you're failing at getting even a phone screen, so you're sending out I'm talking to someone who's sending out 800. He sent out 800 resumes, which is insane. He's a sales manager, really brilliant person, amazing developer, has been doing sales for 10 years, is switching into the industry. He sent out 800 resumes and he got one interview. So wow. I told him, dude, it's obviously your resume because your coding skills are amazing. It's obviously your resume. I gave him a resume just last week, and in 1 week, he's had, I think, 2 or 3 interviews in 1 week after changing the resume. So I've kind of unlocked him from his specific failure point. So for everyone listening too, like if you're still looking for your first job, ask yourself what you're failing at, what specific point you keep getting rejected at, or are you even trying hard enough? And go attack that problem and attack it like an engineer would. Like you don't read through the entire code base when you're trying to debug something. You try and pinpoint the problem, pinpoint the bug, and then you fix that specific bug. So what's your specific failure point? That's important.
So I got a couple things to say real quick. One, I love the idea of thinking about an interview process as a conversion funnel, right? Where you can look at each piece of this and you can try to optimize pieces, because you're trying to get to just one job, right? Like one yes is all you're trying to get to, but there are a number of gates there. The other thing to kind of get back to your point, Ian, is ways to encourage companies to take this on. And I think there's a couple of things that, again, none of this is news, right? We've talked about all these things. One is make money, right? Like we need to prove, as Monarch's trying to do, and as Greg is trying to do, right? Prove there's an economic case. And we've kind of given a couple of ways to do that, but there may be more ways. I think you can be an internal advocate if you're anybody other than a new developer, right? You can be an internal advocate for finding, creating internship programs or creating prove it contracts. Another thing you can do is, especially if you're a new developer who is who gets that first job, right, help people behind you, right? And that can be an advocacy kind of thing. It can just be more just like a connection thing. Like if you've gone through an interview process and you might have talked to a couple companies that have helped, like, or that are accepting of junior developers, when you get that job, don't just leave those companies lying. Like think about who else might fit into that spot and like do the intros. Doesn't take you very long and can help them. And the final thing I would say is I think companies need to realize when it won't work, right? Like what is their economic model, and are they in a situation where they just need super senior devs because of funding or because of the problem space they're in, and acknowledge that and make it public, right? And how do you make it public? Well, you don't put ads for new developers on your jobs page, and new developers need to like acknowledge that. And actually, I've had this happen where someone just fires off a resume for a software developer position where they were obviously not qualified. And I get that, right? They're just shooting because you never know what other companies are opaque things, right? You don't know what is happening inside the company, but you're going to be best served, and the company will be best served by doing the research and finding out what you can and maximize your chances, right? That doesn't mean don't fire off that blind resume, but I would not make a habit of it.
Yeah. Kind of going to the point of, the company wants to hire like that super senior dev. I mean, in today's market, that super senior dev is going to cost you way more money. Like the salaries right now are getting ridiculous again. Similar to what we saw in like previous .com kind of bubbles and so on. I'm not saying we're in a bubble, but we might be approaching one. But I think the salary for like that super senior dev that you're trying to attract to your team is going to cost you way more money than like some intermediate level devs. Like, do you really need, that 10 years of experience to come in and solve a problem? At the same time, it's kind of that organizational of like, how do we ramp anybody up and get them effective on the job?
I mean, I might push back on that a little bit because just to put some numbers on it, right? Like, and I'm in the Denver market. I've seen new devs get hired for 80, 100K, and I've seen senior devs get hired for 200K or 150, right? And so the question is that senior dev going to be 50% more effective than the new dev? And maybe the answer is that the salaries need to like shift a little bit more. Maybe the answer is that companies don't have a good measure of what productivity is. Maybe it gets back to that investment problem again. I'm not sure I buy the fact that like you can get 3 new devs for the price of 1 senior dev or something like that. I don't see that in the job hunting that I've been doing or the job hiring that I've been doing.
Yeah, that's fair. And I also want to just give a shout out to RC Maniac for kind of calling me out on something that I said earlier of like, oh yeah, just go to a meetup, give a lightning talk. I appreciate you kind of calling me out on that, with kind of this implied like, oh, it's easy, anyone can do it. I get that, and I apologize for making that comment. It's not an easy thing to do to get up and give a lightning talk, even if it's only a 5-minute talk. It's not the impression I was trying to get. And so, yeah, I appreciate you calling me out on that. I don't ever want to like make a blanket statement like, oh yeah, just go do the thing. It's simple. I try to avoid that kind of language. So I appreciate you calling me out on that. Thanks so much.
Now, adding to that particular comment, yes, it's hard, especially the first talk, but there's 2 things you can do to overcome it. The first one is acknowledging that it's not as hard as it looks like. It is a challenge, but is sharing something, especially if you're passionate about it or you just want, there's the entry barrier is not as difficult as one tends to think, right? Whenever you give your first talk after it, you feel like you did terrible, but when you watch it on live stream or you rewatch it, you're like, okay, it wasn't that bad. And when you start getting feedback, people are encouraging, right? And I will say the most important aspect, especially if you're getting started, is find a mentor. A mentor will help you get there way faster. So for the job or for the presentations, for anything, when you have someone that can back you up and can give you like honest, positive feedback, you will bridge the gap really fast. Actually, um, anyone that is willing to do their first presentation, I tend to mentor. Anyone can reach me on LinkedIn. I also have a space where I encourage first presenters to give a topic. It could be as simple as, okay, this is how you do this piece of code. This is how you, as you said, this is my experience using this or XYZ technology, right? And this is my opinion. And that makes the conversation way easier. So find a mentor, that's critical, especially if you're struggling quite a bit. And don't be afraid. Like what I would say is people are not gonna be angry with you. They're not gonna push back. Actually, the environment is very friendly. Even if you're maybe doing, um, maybe you're not doing things the right way, people understand and embrace you and say, well, this person took the time to prepare a presentation. This person took the time to share their knowledge or whatever they little or more they know, and they're you're welcome. Like people are grateful for it. So
Yeah.
Yeah, Eric, that's a really great point. And there are tons of people online that are willing to help. It is intimidating to write to a stranger saying, hey, I'm asking you for help because you're a stranger and I have no idea who you really are and you don't know me. So you don't really have a reason to help me, but there are tons of people willing to do that. And to add on top of the meetups, you can do small steps. I struggled with public speaking as well. At first, I attended a meetup, just one meetup I attended. I didn't talk to anyone because I was so scared. The second meetup, after the presentation, someone's presentation, I came and say, hey, I'm Gregory. I really appreciate your presentation. It was great. And I just got involved into a discussion. And after a couple meetups, you start feeling part of the room, and that gives you more courage. So I think you don't have to speak at your first ever meetup. For some people, it comes easy. For some people, it takes a lot of time. But public speaking itself, I find it so rewarding. The first time I gave a presentation and people came to me and say, hey, I really liked it. That was such an amazing feeling. It was scary as hell, but it was really, really rewarding in the end.
I mean, that gets back to the multidimensional thing, right? Like, just like there's no good one way to find a job, there's also no one way to put yourself out there and become part of a community. Plenty of there's one person I know who swears that like the best way for a new developer to get a job is to join an open source project. And there's a ton of work out there that you can do for free in an open source project that will help you build those collaborative skills, build a name for yourself, learn in public. And that works for people who have time and aren't interested in public speaking and want to just be doing coding and they know the technology they want to work in. So I think, Ian, I think you said this, like, don't, always kind of cross correlate the advice that anybody gives you, because, we're all here with a certain amount of context and talking about our journeys, but that our journey is not your journey.
Right?
Yeah,
and
for
if
sure.
you listen to everyone's advice, then you will start jumping from one strategy to another, and it will not work because you will hear, oh, just join open source project. So you'll join, but after 3 months, you will not get any job. So you'll be like, okay, it's not working. So I'm trying to other thing, right? And I think it's even worse because you're trying multiple things, but neither of them enough to actually get you past that post.
Right. And the common thing that I get on the stream a lot is like, well, then how do I juggle trying to do a little bit of all the things? Because then I'm not going to be very effective if I'm only doing like 1 day of open source and 1 day of a meetup talk and 1 day of studying data structures and algorithms and a couple of days of leak code. Like, I'm not going to get great at any of them if I'm trying to spread myself across all the things. But I do agree with very, very much with the idea of you need to listen to a lot of perspectives. You need to get a lot of ideas and then form your own plan from there. Like, you can't just listen to me and follow what I say as advice and go get a job. You can't just follow Greg. You can't just follow Monarch. You got to take like little bits and pieces and figure out what's going to work for you in your environment with, how you're balancing work and life and everything and trying to find that job. Like, you have to find your own balance in that. But I think it starts with hearing a lot of perspectives.
And I think it helps if you see it as a journey, right? Imagine that you're trying to travel to a new city and you start by walking and you ask for directions, right? If you don't have a map, and most of the times you might have a rough idea on where you want to go. Maybe you have a rough idea you have to go north, but along the way you're going to see that there's 2 roads and they go 2 different ways. But I think the very first step is just to do it, to embrace it, to not fear it, to just as some companies will say, just do it. So it's trying, and see it as a journey. Some things, and in any journey, some things are gonna go right. In sometimes things are gonna go wrong. But as long as you keep asking for advice and have people point you in the right direction, usually you're gonna start shaping your way into where you want to go, and that makes it way easier.
Well, and I would just say that, like,
Totally agree.
oh, Monarch, did you have something to say? Sorry.
I did, if you don't mind.
ahead.
I'll make it snappy. There's this really great classic startup book called The Lean Startup, and it's by this dude called Erick Ries, or Ries, however you want to spell it. I don't hear it being talked about a lot these days, but The Lean Startup really shaped my approach on my career, and my approach on how to get that first dev job. And somebody in chat was just talking about comparing getting your first dev job to starting a startup. Starting a startup is easy. Running the startup is hard. But how it works is you shouldn't look at your career as your first job search. You should not look at it as I'm going to get that job. That's important, obviously, but you should look at it as I'm going to learn how to get my first job, and find as many counterpoints, like everybody over here is saying. Find as many counterpoints as you can, find as many conflicting data points as you can, and collect learnings and debug the process. Just keep iterating on it. You don't know how to find your first dev job. I promise you, once you figure it out, it's going to get way easier for you because it's a replicable process once you learn it. But and then you also have the advantage of being an experienced dev, and you'll never have this problem again. But you should really look at it from a lean startup approach of, let's just have fun with the journey, collect learnings, don't put so much pressure on yourself to actually find the job. Just go out there and explore, and make sure you have enough runway. I think it was Eric, might have been Eric, or Greg. Somebody said that you should have at least a few months of runway. Like, make sure that you can sustain yourself for several months, and as long as you can sustain yourself for, let's say, it takes about 6 to 12 months realistically for somebody who's really trying to get their first dev job. There are outliers after that, but most people get their job in 6 to 12 months. Just have fun with it and experiment. See what would happen if you send a message with a certain format to 10 people on LinkedIn. Stuff like that. Just experiment.
Yeah, that's good. What advice would you give to a company? So if you could sit down as a consultant with a company and give them some advice on here's how to bring an entry-level dev on, what kind of advice would you give? Let's start with Greg.
So I would tell them that this thing, so the question is why should they get a junior dev? Is that the question?
Yeah, like how would you help them formulate a process or something to bring a junior dev on the team?
Yeah, so I would explain that this is a long-term thing, right? That this is a process like any other, and that needs to be part of the company. So think about the journey of a junior developer from the beginning. How to make sure that the person who joins your company, that they enjoy the culture, that they learn the culture, that they start being productive. What are the things that need to be put in place before you bring that person? Because if you just hire a junior developer, then they will have terrible experience, because if there's never been a junior developer in your company, nobody knows how to approach junior developers. Senior developers probably don't have patience enough to deal with someone who's very new. So you need to put things in place. You need to prepare for it, because if you want to succeed, it needs to be a part of a long-term plan. It cannot be just an afterthought that, hey, let's see what happens if we hire junior. Because a lot of people try it and then they fail, and then they blame the juniors for that. But it's their own fault and lack of preparation.
Cool. Monarch, what kind of advice would you give folks?
I'm gonna address super small startups, ones where just or greenfield projects that know that they want to hire juniors in the long run. I would keep your technology as simple as possible, and don't try and use anything fancy that might turn juniors off. Now, TypeScript is fine, for example. I'm not saying don't use TypeScript. I'm not saying don't use statically typed languages. But what I am saying is maybe stay away from complex architectures. Maybe maybe try and right fit your technology to your domain. So for example, I'm rebuilding the Mint Bean website, and I realized that it's just a damn website. So I'm using literally, I've stopped using React. It's a huge deal on my Twitter timeline. I'm telling everybody, you know, I'm saying I'm going out and I'm just trying to be a bit of a shock artist and saying fuck React. React is fine, but maybe stop using React for a project that you're expecting junior devs to be on. Maybe stop using what's the huge DynamoDB. Don't use DynamoDB and serverless architecture for a simple project that you expect many juniors to be on, because that's going to be a massive cost to onboard juniors onto. So make sure that your technology is simple enough to onboard juniors, is what I would say.
Cool. Eric, what kind of advice would you give?
I believe that promoting have an inclusive culture in all kinds of ways, not only with the background, but also with diversity is important, and to build it to be as part of the company's values. Like I think if you have like-minded people that they're willing to work and on board and help break that barrier, you will have great success on the long term. So make it part of the company and actively invest on it. But small steps. If it's a company that doesn't have that kind of culture, or if it's a company that don't have the process already, you can take a small step by identifying there's always somebody that is willing to go the extra length to make things work and help other people get onboarded or join the company, right? So identify those leaders and empower them to bring change, to bring positive change on this aspect. So I believe that could be like a first step on how to start the whole, and it's like a snowball effect. You start with a small thing and it grows and grows, and then you start identifying that other people in the company want to help too, and suddenly you have a whole team passionate about, making a positive change within the organization or the project. So I think that's like just take the first step and empower people and help them and give them the resources to start doing it. And you can start with just few resources, and then it will grow by itself.
All right. Dan, any thoughts?
Sure. I guess my one piece of advice would be to companies are pretty good about evaluating projects, and I would treat this as another project, right? It's an economic opportunity. You're going to have to invest in it. You need to do the calculus and see if the ROI is there, and have metrics, have budget, have timelines. Don't just think you can hire a new dev or a dev that, unlike other devs that you've hired, right? You wouldn't just hire what's an example? A trainer, right? If you've never hired a trainer before and just say go forth, right? You would have a project plan. So do the same thing with new devs.
Yeah, that's great. Fantastic. Awesome. We'll start to wind down from there. I did have one question. It was a little bit unrelated, but they asked if I could ask everyone on the panel this question. They were asking specifically from your own perspectives, based on how you help other people with sort of coaching and getting that first job. What are some things that need not be put on a resume or on a CV? What kinds of things would you suggest don't put this stuff on a resume?
I would say, based on what I see in resumes, sometimes people put completely irrelevant things. You might not believe it, guys, but I've seen someone put that they got like a third place in a chess tournament in high school. Like, I was like, oh, okay, that's nice, but that was like 15 years ago. Really?
I mean, if you're a chess company, that's great, because they're bringing that culture, right?
Yeah, but I think just look at everything and ask yourself, okay, is this relevant? Because the recruiter, whoever looks at a resume, probably will not see everything there. They will not read it all top to bottom. They will look at random spots. And if the random spot is something from your high school, something completely irrelevant, that loses their interest. So make sure that every single thing that you put there actually makes sense and is relevant to your job search.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Monarch?
I think. Go ahead.
I would say not put on your resume. don't if you're a career switcher, and a lot of people are, and I was too, don't put your entire career history on your resume
Yeah.
if it's not related to tech. So if you're a recent example from the person that I didn't name, but the person I was speaking about before, he had 10 years of experience as a sales manager. He led with that at the very top of his resume. And half his resume, about 50% of the real estate, was about his experience as a sales manager, leading teams and working with departments and whatnot. And I told him, dude, like, that's why you're not getting hired, is because you're emphasizing the past. Put that experience, shrink it down into one line and drop it at the bottom of your resume. I don't want to see anything more about it. Now start emphasizing the technology you're working on and sprinkle technology, like sprinkle React all over your resume. Like say React like 5 times in different places in your resume. Say Express and TypeScript 5 times across your resume. And so I would say, de-emphasize the past if it's not relevant.
Great. Eric?
Yeah, I will say follow the KISS principles. Keep it simple.
Yeah. We won't call you stupid. That's the
Right.
other S in the KISS principle. But yeah, keep it simple. Go ahead.
So yes, a lot of people make the wrong assumption that there's going to be somebody going through the whole pages or resume, every single word. And sometimes when you get that first phone call, you're talking to somebody that just got on their inbox your resume, that is seeing it for the very first time while they're talking to you. So the very first page of your resume is like the prime real estate. So they don't need to know your whole story or the whole details on the first page. So you can have, for example, 2 types of resumes, right? One with a summary and one that is extended with all the details of every project. Or you can have on the very first page like bullet points of what you have done that is relevant to this, right? Stuff to not put in there, as it has been mentioned before, is do not put things that are not relevant or things that not build the narrative of why, because the narrative has to rely on why are you a good fit for the job, and you have to let people or recruiters or know in a matter of seconds clearly identified why would you be a good fit, why should I keep talking to you, and that has to be as clear as possible. So make sure you have the keywords in there of the technologies, maybe some bullet points, and name and number. Things to not put in the resume. I have found that you don't need to put your picture on your resume. You don't need to put your full address, maybe the city, but I wouldn't put I live on this particular street, or I live on this particular house number.
If I can add one thing, do not rate your skills as a junior developer, especially. People put like React 3 out of 5 stars.
Yeah,
Because
take
as a
that off.
junior developer, if you put anything that is like above the average, people will not trust it. Because if you don't have any professional experience and you're like, okay, my Postgres is 5 out of 5, that's just straight line.
What does
So
that even
it's
mean?
better
Yeah.
just don't do it at all. Yeah.
Right.
So I got a couple things. Eric, you took my no picture. Don't need to put a picture. I would actually say don't go more than 1 page. That is something that I think is important. Nothing that doesn't relate to the job. And people will say, oh gosh, I have to have multiple resumes. And what I like to do is I have one long resume that's probably 8 pages, kind of consisting of everything, and I'll condense it down for specific jobs that I'm going for. Obviously, nothing that's a lie, nothing that you want that you don't want to talk about. So if you once did a project in ASP.NET and you don't want to do ASP.NET, don't put it on your resume. It's a bad idea. And then the other thing that may be a subtlety, but I think sends a signal is an old email provider, right? I actually use yahoo.com for my personal email, but I don't put that on my resume. I think Gmail is like the minimum. A custom domain is fine. Other ones are a little more tech forward, Proton Mail
So
or whatever.
I shouldn't use my AOL.com email address anymore?
That's more for sending pictures to your grandma, I think, Ian. No. Yeah, I just think, again, that's a very subtle point. I don't think that's going to disqualify you, but you're just kind of, to Eric's point, you're removing reasons for people to say no. That's all. That's entirely your job with the resume, is remove the reasons for people to say no.
Mm-hmm. And I tell folks this all the time on the stream. Like when I'm screening resumes, I'm looking for a reason to just pass, no, okay, maybe, right? Because I've got hundreds or thousands of these resumes to go through. I need to narrow that list down really quick. That's why they're using automated systems and things like that, which have their own level of bias and how they scrape out those keywords and so on. But the advice I generally give, I've seen some stuff go by in chats, like all these guys have watched Ian's video on how to make a resume. Is I tell people all the time, make a really big resume, put every project, every job, every skill, lots of bullet points, make a copy of that when you go to apply for a job and trim it back down to 1 page. Trim out all the stuff that's not relevant. Yeah, definitely take out stuff that could bias against you, like your photo, maybe even the geography of where you live. I think in today's realm where everything's remote, put your time zone on there. That's really all they care about. Is like, what time zone are you in? Like if I'm going to call you, like, is it 3 a.m. or 3:30 in the morning where Greg is right now? I appreciate you hanging out with us so late. Or, is it like, are you in the same time zone, or, are you in a time zone that's going to work well for the team? Like those are things that they really are going to be looking for at a glance. And like others have said, like if they happen to glance at something and it's irrelevant, they don't care. At the same time, I also appreciate other perspectives that other folks like Jonan Scheffler has had on the stream, where they've come in and said, like, I like to see that you're human and you can do things beyond tech. And so if you've got a black belt in karate, like, put that on the resume if you've got the space. I would say you probably don't have the room for that kind of stuff. If you're really targeting them, you want to show them the projects and the skills and the technologies that you use that are bringing high relevance to them in that job. Because that's really what the resume is. It's not an archive of everything. It's what you want to show them. Like, this is the value I bring to your company right now. This is all you need to know about what I'm bringing to your company. If you want the full history, go look at my LinkedIn, or I'll give you the 8-page resume or whatever. Like, I'll give you that if you really want it. But here's just the 1-page resume of what I bring as value. So yeah, I appreciate all your perspectives on that. It echoes a lot of what I say on the stream. So thank you.
There's one more thing I
gotta go for it.
Oh, thank you. It also came to my mind, one important thing. Your resume is a public document, and it's going to be floating all around the internet. Things not to put in there. If you can afford the luxury of having a secondary phone or secondary email address that can be spammed, also that could be something to think about. Because if you put your primary phone, you might be receiving phone calls at 3 a.m., at 5 p.m. Eventually, it might become a problem if you put your main phone. So ideally, if you can afford it and you can just stay on top of it, having a secondary phone or secondary email just for this, because it is a public document that is going to be out there, it's very important to think about. And that also resonates with do not put your full address in there. It's public information, so also be careful about it.
Cool.
Yeah, agree. And I also have to agree a lot. My last point. I have to agree with what Ian said before, which is nobody's going to read your resume from top to bottom. It's skimmable. My resume, I wanted to test this theory. So in my latest resume, I put in a little link to a Rickroll video, and it's like a little Easter egg with a funny little line that makes you click a little link. And of everybody who read my resume, one person brought up the Rickroll. One person.
That's funny.
So.
That's hilarious. Cool. Someone asked if we're wrapping up or if there's time for questions. Greg, I do want to be respectful of your time because it is 3:30 in the morning where you are over in Amsterdam. So if you're willing to stay and hang out and answer questions, I'd love to have you. But if you do need to go, totally understand. It's more realistic timeline for everyone else on the call. But if you've got questions, please drop those in chat.
Right, I can stay for like 20 more minutes, so that's fine.
Awesome. Appreciate that. So yeah, if you've got more questions, definitely drop that in chat. Dan, you got to go?
Bail. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks for coming, Dan.
Lots of fun, and I'll see you all later.
Appreciate it, Dan.
Really appreciate
Cheers.
your perspective here.
Bye.
All right, so that was Dan Moore, and we'll have we'll definitely be putting Dan's contact info in. But yeah, if you've got other questions, definitely drop those in. Zooey mentioned I signed up for a Google Voice number to forward to your cell phone. Yeah, I love Google Voice for that. You can actually use Google Voice to find a phone number in an area code where the company is based and make them think you already live there. You're way more likely to get a phone call. If you're across the country, and especially for an entry-level dev, and they're like, "Oh, are we gonna have to relocate that person?" Again, they're going to try to find ways to bias against you. But if you give them a local phone number, you're like, "I'm already there. I want that job with that company in Colorado, so let me give you like a 720 or a 303 area code," and they're gonna look at that going, "Oh, you're local? Yeah, we'll call a local. We love local people, right?" And you're like, "Well, actually, I live in New York, but I'm moving out to Colorado." Well, you don't have to tell them that you're going to move if they make you a job offer and that you're going to hit them up for relocation expenses. Like, you don't have to tell them any of that until you get the offer and be like, "All right, now can you, pay me some money to relocate?"
No, I
Those kinds
learned
of
the
things.
same about LinkedIn. If you want to
Yeah.
relocate somewhere, just put the name of the place already as your location on LinkedIn.
Yep.
People who look for developers in that area will start contacting you. And
Yep.
only later you mention, "Hey, I don't live there yet." But at that point, it will not be a problem anymore.
Right. Or I tell people, like, put the location on the resume of where you want to go get that job. So if they're based in Texas, put Texas on your resume. And when they call and say, "Oh, you live in Texas," you'd be like, "I'm already planning to move to Texas." In parentheses, silently in your head, you're saying, "If you make me a job offer." But you don't have to tell them like, "Oh yeah, like I'm only going to move if you make me a job offer." But you can say like, "Oh yeah, my plan is to relocate to Texas. I'm going to be there in a couple of weeks." Things like that. And they're way more likely to like continue that conversation if they think you're already moving there. And then if they do make an offer, then you can negotiate for relocation and things like that.
Yeah, actually, I on my early career, I had that issue in which I was very eager to have opportunities within the United States, but at the time I had my LinkedIn set up for a country abroad, and I was not getting much traction. But immediately after I made a switch to the United States and start having experience within the country, like the number of opportunities that became available to me changed drastically. So this is also very important, the location aspect.
Yeah, RC Maniac brought in chat too, like, unless you have zero plans to move. And I agree with that. Like, if you don't intend to move, if you intend to have a remote conversation or a remote job, you can have that conversation as part of the interview and say, "I live here," or "I live in this time zone now. I'm looking for a remote job." And a lot of companies are really good now in very modern times about saying this job's 100% remote, or we expect to be some sort of hybrid approach. But you can always have that conversation, say, "I am where I am, I want to stay remote." And then it's up to them. But you're also interviewing them. I get that when it's your first job in tech, you feel like you don't have a lot of choice, but you do have choice. It's just, how painful is that choice, I think is really what you're looking at. But yeah, definitely keep dropping questions in chat. We got a little bit of time left. I also like to end all my guest sessions with like silly questions. I think Eric, you may remember some of these. Actually, no, Eric, I didn't do these with you last time you were on the stream, so I definitely owe you some silly questions. Did I? Okay. Yeah, I like to ask silly questions like, "Is a hot dog a sandwich?" and things like that. So we'll end with some of those kind of as we go. But but yeah, keep dropping things in here. So. DeBrinator says, "Wouldn't companies look down on that? Like, what if they just don't want to pay anyone's relocation expenses?" I mean, some companies can actually get a tax break if they reimburse your relocation expenses. They can actually get a tax break in some circumstances. And so it's actually, and it's a one-time cash payout. You do get taxed on that money, and it's treated as a bonus. And so sometimes the tax rate can be as high as 50%. And so if they're like, "Oh yeah, we'll pay you 50%, or pay you $5,000, you're really only going to get like $2,500. So you do need to be careful. Like, don't spend $5,000 moving. Spend as little as possible, because you are going to get taxed on that money. But it is something that you can ask about. Worst case, they'll say no, but it is something that you can definitely ask for.
Yeah, and if it's a tech job, like, sometimes it's worth it. Like, the rate that you're getting, it's worthwhile to actually relocate, even if you have to cover those expenses yourself.
The thing about the interview process, is the deeper in you get, the more leverage you as a candidate have. So if you say, "Yeah, I need relocation," at the very beginning of the call, you're only going to attract the biggest companies who already have that in their process and they're advertising that, which means very few companies. But if you bring that up closer and closer to the end, for example, if you bring it up after they send you the offer, it's probably too late, and they'll probably get pissed off that you tell them that you're telling them this right at the very, very end. But a good time to bring it up would be maybe the last cultural fit interview. Bring it up there because they know they're getting to know you. They already know you, like they know you're really good. It takes, for a junior developer, it takes between $5,000 and $10,000 to acquire. That's what they call it, acquisition cost. To acquire a junior developer, it takes between $5,000 to $10,000. For senior developers, it's way higher. And if your acquisition cost is $5,000 to $10,000, hey, if you found a really good person and you just need to pay them another, $3,000 for moving, it's worth it rather than losing them and spending way more money finding a developer. It's worth it. Just pay the cost and get the government to subsidize you.
Yep.
Well worth it.
Cool. Duke Babus asked in chat, how do you all deal with just not wanting to work? I'm pretty burned out from everything, and that's with a couple of months off. That's definitely hard. I mean, I left my job in December, so I had full-time effort to put into the job hunt, and it took me, I took most of December off after some interviews didn't work out. I took several weeks of December off, and I really hit the job hunt. Early January, I got a job offer. I started my job on the 31st, so it took me a month to get a job. And that's with a ton of experience and juggling lots of interviews. So, your mileage may vary, but yeah, feeling burned out and needing a break, I get that. I totally get it. But at the same time, you got to pay your bills and stuff like that too. So there's going to be some balance, I think, to strike in there. But have any of you had to deal with like burnout and like feelings of burnout? Like, how do you cope with that?
Yeah.
So go ahead, Eric.
Thank you. So actually, it's something we have to deal on a everyday and yearly basis. And at least for myself, I had great success on my personal experience to just every year, like pick a time where I disappear from the face of the earth for about a week. No electronics, middle of the desert, no even signal. Try to just find a time where you get to reevaluate yourself, who you are, what you want to do, the direction, and to be an environment that promotes celebrating who you are, but also focusing your energy on the right path. And every person has a source of energy, like what makes you wake up every day. And for myself, is mentoring, collaborating with people, learning new things, and innovating. So I have been focusing not only on my job but also my free time to work towards those goals and be surrounded by that kind of environment. That's where my energy comes by. So every person has a source of energy, and that helps combat the burnout.
Yeah, great.
I think important part about burnout is that taking a break and going back to the same environment doesn't solve the problem. Like the burnout is a result of something, right? If you're not happy in your current environment with your current life, then you need to change something. It might be change of a job. It might be change of your habits. Maybe you need to start, getting up earlier in the morning. Maybe you need to start hitting the gym. You need to change something about your life. If you get burnout and you just take a couple months break and you go back to the same point, it's just the same cycle.
Yep. I actually heard somebody say one time, and I dropped this in chat too, like use your time off to prevent burnout. Don't use it to recover from burnout, because if you use your vacation time to recover, you're just walking right back into that same fire and you're not actually going to change anything. Cool. Let's move on, because go ahead, Monarch.
Sure, let's go. It's cool. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, just we got a handful of questions to kind of get through here, and I don't want to take too long. Any tips for a junior dev who doesn't know what they want to do just yet? And that person, Jay Zhu, followed up with, I just graduated from college and a lot of internships are requiring me to return to school. So I feel like I graduated at a bad time. Like they want students that are willing to go back for another semester and so on. Any thoughts on kind of, you're still in school trying to get that internship and you don't even know what you want to do?
Yeah. Great question. I think you're at the stage where you want to experiment, you want to try out different things, and you shouldn't limit yourself just by the thought of I need to get it perfect the first time I do it. That you shouldn't limit yourself by from that perspective. Allow yourself to make mistakes. Don't just take stupid risks. Like if you know you hate hardware and you get a VHDL job, don't do it because you're gonna hate yourself. But if you know you want to do web development and you're not sure if you want to do Java or JavaScript or Python, or if you want to do like something funkier like Scala, or maybe even get like Golang jobs or Rust web devs or whatever it is, take the first opportunity that you think is worth it, because you're starved for opportunity right now. So take the first opportunity that's in the ballpark of what you want to do and iterate in your career after that. So I got my first job I learned Java. Then I got my first gigs in JavaScript. Then I got my first job in Ruby on Rails. Then my next job was back to Java, and then they gave me a bit of React. So I've been doing a bunch of different stuff. And over the years, I figured out that I really like JavaScript and I really hate JavaScript at the same time. I keep looking for alternatives. I tried Golang because I'm up to here with JavaScript now, but it's my first language. Now I'm iterating away from JavaScript and I want to find another language. I'll find one day. It's going to change, and it should change. Even 6 months in, it should change. So just keep an open mind.
Yeah. Greg, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that university is a great time to experiment, right? You can even talk to professors and suggest some different stuff that they normally teach. Like on my database courses, we were learning Oracle, and I asked professor, hey, can I do assignment in MongoDB instead? And they never heard about it, like it was years ago. And they said, okay, give it a try, right? So I didn't know anything about Mongo, but that gave me opportunity to try, and I had to do that assignment anyway, right? So I think university is just wonderful time to realize how many things you don't want to do. Just try them, then cross them off and say, okay, I gave it a try. I don't like it. There are still tons of other things that I will try, and one of them will stick.
Yeah. Go ahead, Eric.
Finally, I would like to add, if you're a freshman out of college, you can kill two birds with one stone if you get involved with a consultancy company. You will be assigned a diversity of projects, but also they will help you get the tools and mentorship that you need to break into your first job, to get at your first role. So actually, even though you will not get the full paycheck, they actually take a percentage of what you earn. You will get the experience in exchange and the diversity of projects in exchange and the tools that you need to succeed. So that's also a major way of breaking into the space.
Cool. I'm going to add one more thought on this, and then I have a question from a different platform that I want to address too. I would say the first job, again, I said earlier, it doesn't have to be your dream job, but I think where a lot of new grads get sort of analysis paralysis, as we say, is they stay in one spot going, well, I don't know if I want to do that. I don't know if I want to do that. I don't know if I want to do that. So I'm just going to stay where I am because it's comfortable. While I look at everything until I see something, that looks like exactly what I can go do. I think kind of like Monarch was saying, if you just go take a job, now you've got a whole new perspective of looking around because you've at least made movement in some direction. And now you can say, okay, now that I've got that experience, do I like back-end development? Do I like front-end development? Do I like doing DevOps? Do I like doing that QA job? And we were talking in chat earlier about like go get a QA job, and someone's like, but then you get shoeboxed or sort of pigeonholed, as we call it, and that's the only kind of job you get. And I don't agree. I think you can always change it as long as you've got a story to tell and how that's making you a better developer. But I think that you can go get that job, and then you can pivot, and then you can pivot off of that job, and it's going to look like you're kind of all over the map. But as an entry-level dev, somebody that's brand new in tech, I mean, there is some level of expectation in that we know you don't know everything. We know that you haven't got it all figured out. We don't expect you to have it all figured out. So just go get any kind of job. At least you've made some movement in some direction from there, for sure.
And also, if you do the narrative right, it actually can become a strength instead of a challenge or a detriment. Like if you bring, like, I experience all these projects and I know this and that and that, and that's what I'm a stronger engineer, that actually becomes a positive thing.
Yep. Cool. And Zed, go ahead and drop Monarch's Discord. I'm totally okay with that kind of promotion. That's okay. So let's get to this other follow-up question that I got from LinkedIn. It said a lot of entry-level devs come with maybe newer industrial kinds of certifications like 2020, 2022, but at the same time, a lot of tech companies are kind of continuing on with like what's already working for them, which might be like, 2010 to 2015 kind of tech stacks. How do you reconcile that? Or do you go study those older technologies in order to get that job? Because if you're studying something that's like cutting edge or bleeding edge, you're not necessarily going to find a job in that. Like I've seen this firsthand, where it's like, okay, well, Rails 7 came out. You could go learn Rails 7, but a lot of companies are still on Rails 4 and Rails 5. Your experience isn't going to directly map onto what they're looking for. Like, yes, you have Rails experience, but it's going to be different enough that you're still going to struggle a little bit in that job. What do you all think about like versioning kinds of differences in tech stacks and how to sort of position like what you're learning versus what's actually being used in the industry?
I think it's all about how you spin it. I can go out there and I'm very comfortable saying, oh yeah, I know Java. You have Golang. I've done Java and I've done JavaScript. Golang is going to be no problem for me. I've also done a bit of Python and Ruby. So like, you don't have to learn a specific technology if you can sell yourself. And sometimes that means you need to put your best, well, not sometimes, every time. It means you have to put your best foot forward and present your strengths and the things that are relevant to the job. Sometimes you have more than you know. And if you just write down every single item, like brainstorm every single item that you can actually sell that's relevant to the job, you might be able to find a job without even having the technology. And I've hired devs like that too, where they didn't have a tech, but I hired them. Was a great choice because, hey, they're devs. I think there's this object fetishism in JavaScript. I think it's more like technology fetishism or buzzword fetishism, where we get obsessed with certain buzzwords like React or Vue or Angular or JavaScript or TypeScript or Java, whatever you have. And we forget that developers are basically learning machines that go out there and learn what they need to learn,
right,
and then design systems. So I think the industry is way more flexible than people.
Yep. Some folks have already answered this in chat, but leave me alone. Good to have you in chat. I saw the follow earlier tonight. What are some good online communities that you would suggest joining?
Meetup.com, free coding bootcamp. If you're a female, you can also Women Who Code. Those are the very first that come to my mind.
I think that depends on what you're looking for, right? There are communities specific to junior developers. There are communities around certain language or framework. Like some time ago, I looked at Blitz.js, so I went to their Discord because I wanted to reach out to people that know more about this particular framework. So that depends what you want to get from the community, and there are just tons of them. And I always recommend Twitter because there's huge dev community on Twitter, and it's a place for discovery. You can just see one developer that you know, check who they are following, and then you automatically get hundreds of new people that you can follow and see what they are posting.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, I agree with that. There's a lot going on with Twitter Spaces right now. A lot of people like willing to reach out and help, and that's how I found most of the people on the panel tonight. Like Greg and Monarch, mostly found you guys just from hanging out on Twitter.
I got to say about Twitter, it's really you got to be careful who you follow. Sure. I think everybody on this panel is pretty experienced, so you want to make sure that you're following people who know what they're doing. There are a lot of Twitter gurus out there who are selling stuff, and I don't mean selling courses or anything like that. I actually respect the people who are selling courses. What I mean is they're trying to build clout on Twitter by basically attracting developer crowds. You have to be careful who you listen to. You have to be careful who you follow, and there's a lot of toxicity on Twitter as well. So just be careful who you follow over there. What I do is I try and find I do a beeline for senior architects and senior developers and well-known people from the Java community, because those guys know what they're doing, and then I kind of like go out from the Java community. Instead of starting with JavaScript, which is relatively shallow, I start with Java, and then I kind of fan out in terms of finding influencers and people that I like. But you got to be careful, especially as a new developer.
A Philosopher 30 asked a good question. When do I know something well enough to list it as a skill on my resume?
I will say if you're able.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I will say if you're able to have a discussion around it and actually make an implementation, like if you can have some use with it, like you can be honest. For example, on the mobile space, there's always new and trending technologies, right? And it has been constantly evolving. So one of the latest things I have been working on is, applying coroutines, and there's Jetpack Compose that is not even mature enough, but it's out there, and there's a lot of buzzwords about it. And you can say, well, I did some code with it. Here's the project. Here is the pros and cons that I found, and just be open about it, right? And I will not list it as I'm a super expert on this particular thing, but you can be open. This is what I do. This is my experience. As resonating with you mentioned earlier, this is my experience with the technology.
Right.
And if you have 6 months, that's great. If you have 1 year, that's amazing. You have 2 years, you're set, right? 2 years plus. But if you're at least able to have a decent conversation and actually apply the concept and have an understanding on what is happening, you can be open about it and just show
Awesome.
that eagerness to learn and do.
Cool. All right, we're going to do some rapid fire questions and we'll kind of wrap up for the night. So these questions are not meant to be very thought provoking. Just tell us the first thing that jumps in your mind, and I'm just going to kind of circle around these. So Greg, what's the most interesting piece of useless trivia that you know?
Oh my God. I can't think of anything. Nothing comes to my mind, sorry.
I'll share my favorite one. There's enough room between the Earth and the Moon to fit all the other planets of the solar system.
Oh, wow.
All right, let's go to Eric. I need to fix Monarch's video here. Eric, what secret conspiracy would you like to start?
Ooh. Time travel. Time travel, just having people go around and fixing events or changing the fate of the world. I'm passionate about sci-fi and especially around that. Yes.
All right. Monarch, what's the funniest joke that you know by heart?
Oh gosh, I don't know any jokes by heart. I mean, isn't life a joke?
Maybe, but if I ever catch that physician that botched my limb replacement surgery, I'm going to kill him with my bare hands. Greg, how do you feel about putting pineapple on pizza?
Love it. And I'm
Awesome.
gonna die on that hill.
All right, you're coming back on my stream. Oh, I got thumbs up from everybody. You're all coming back. All right, cool. Let's see, Eric. Let me know if I already asked this one from you. What part of a kid's movie scared you and scarred you for life?
What part? Well, I will mention just the name of the movie, and everyone will know it.
Yep.
Unfortunately, it was a recurring movie that happened to be placed in the same channel that at different times of the day you had my favorite kids series, and one of the time I actually watched it, and I didn't want it to shower for a few days, afraid that it would come out of the sink or something. So.
I was actually thinking about the exact same scene. I shit you not. I was thinking about the exact same scene.
That's great.
That means we're all on the night, so.
Yep. Monarch, what's the most embarrassing thing you've ever worn?
Worn? Oh, God. I can't share that. Okay, so as a kid, I was forced to wear... My mom forced me to wear a dress for some reason, and I have no clue why she did that, but she did. I thought it was cool at the time. She even buttoned it up from the back and everything, and then I grew up, and then I recalled that. Well, I haven't thought about this in years, bro. What are you doing to me?
Sorry to bring up the trauma. Greg, in one sentence, how would you sum up the internet?
It's the most beautiful dumpster of fire.
Perfect. Eric, which body part do you wish you could detach and why?
My hands. I would love to be able to multitask and do all kinds of crazy things with my hands, just being able to detach. If I could still have control on them.
All right. Monarch, what used to be considered trashy but is now very classy?
JavaScript.
All right. Greg, what mythical creature would improve the world the most if it existed?
Oh my god, the mythical creature. No idea. I guess dragons, they could provide very cheap heating.
Cheap heating, that's great. Cool. All right, we did have a first-time chat from TonyBoy713. Just to bring it back to a more serious note, I'm a recent CS grad struggling to land a job as a software developer. I have some projects on my resume, but nothing with big frameworks. Any advice on what I should learn or do? I think a lot of it comes down to how you talk about your experience and talk about what you know. And as we've mentioned earlier on the stream, maybe before you joined us, making the resume really relevant to that particular job, that particular role. So what are you putting on that resume for that job that's really relevant to what they have? It doesn't have to be like 100% matching their entire tech stack. But if you say like, hey, I don't know React, but I know JavaScript and I've done maybe some work in Angular or Vue, like that's transferable. Even just having JavaScript is still going to help you in that job. If you've got HTML and CSS, you can learn React. And so if you don't have like big frameworks on there, at the same time, if you're still trying to interview, I would say go build a project in the meantime. Go find like a real world problem, solve it. Don't just do like a to-do list tutorial. Like go find something interesting, go build a little project. Doesn't have to be huge, but build something in there. And just say like, hey, I've got a lot of experience in Python or Java. I built this little project on the side because I saw that you use that technology. If you can speak to that kind of stuff in an interview, it'll really help you stand out. Any thoughts from other folks?
Yeah, I would say that there is a job for every framework and language right now. I think it's more important to stick to something and to improve in that so that you can prove that you can work, that you can be productive in that particular skill. Like people are learning languages like Clojure or Elm that you rarely hear about, but they are companies that are hiring and that are very eager to even teach people that languages because they are so niche. So I would say it's more important to just keep practicing a certain skill than the skill itself.
Mm-hmm. Monarch, Eric, any thoughts?
It's challenging to think about that particular question. I will say I think you can always translate ability. Like even if you don't have the particular ability or the particular technology, showing the eagerness to learn and showing why can you be good or complement it could be very important. Like it can be valuable, as you said.
I think one last thing to maybe
like focusing on the core computer science or understanding the why and how helps overcome any hurdles and learn many frameworks.
Last thing I'd probably add on that too is focus on depth over breadth of knowledge. Go really deep on what you already know. Don't try to learn like so many other things, especially for new developers. I see them fall into that trap a lot where they're like, oh, there's all these new things I can go learn. It's like, yeah, but at what cost? You're not getting deep enough knowledge to be able to talk about the depth of how to do something really well in any particular technology. So I would say double down on what you already know and learn that even better. And don't worry too much about like trying to learn everything else. I think you'll jeopardize too much early in your career on breadth of knowledge and lose out on the depth of knowledge. Cool. I'm not sure if we lost Monarch. No, you're still there. I see you moving.
I'm
cool.
Here. Yeah.
You just got quiet. All right. X, good to see you in chat. +1 to teaching developers. It's been difficult to find a C++ developers, so we have onboarding course and mentorship program for developers we hire. Yeah, like it's a lot easier to teach somebody the technical skills that you want them to have on the team than to teach them like collaboration and teamwork and good communication skills and things like that, for sure. Yeah. Memory management and pointers all day, for sure, for sure. All right, awesome. I think we'll wrap up there for the night. We've been going a little over 2 hours. Again, Greg, really, really appreciate your time. I know it's like almost time for the sun to come up where you are in Amsterdam. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your time tonight. And for the blog post to kind of kick this all off, I think it was a really good discussion about like just what's broken in the tech industry around junior devs and you know, although your post was more about like senior devs and how, you know, companies are losing out on that. But I think it raises a good question of, if we don't train up the junior devs, there aren't going to be senior devs later. You know, I mean, they're gradually retiring and things like that, or, you know, moving into like managerial types of roles. And so there's going to be this vacuum of people to get hired. We got to start hiring those juniors at some point. So yeah, I really appreciate you writing that article and sharing it with the world and kind of prompting discussions like this. I think it was fantastic. Monarch, Eric, really appreciate both your time. Eric, thanks for coming back. Appreciate you being on the stream again. Monarch, definitely love to have you back again. Greg, I'd love to have you back on the stream, maybe sometime that's a little more conducive to regular work hours for you.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll do a morning stream sometime just to change it up. But yeah, thank you so much for all your thoughts and perspectives. They were all super valuable for everybody. They echo a lot of what I share on the stream all the time, but also really good just perspectives and thoughts from literally around the world, and lots of different perspectives on building resumes, getting those jobs, interviewing, all that kind of stuff. Thank you so much for all that. Cool. I think we'll wrap up there. Let's go find somebody to raid real quick. Let's go see who's online. Let's see, Sunday, this coming week is going to be just Q&A. Next Thursday, I've got Chris Perillo. He's a tech celebrity. We're going to be roasting his LinkedIn and his resume and working with him on all that. He's not looking for a job, but he hasn't kept that stuff up to date. So we're looking forward to having Chris on the stream. And then most of the rest of February is just me getting caught up on Q&A and resume reviews. So if you have a resume that you want to review on the stream, here's a link where you can submit it. I do ask that you anonymize your name, your phone number, your email address, or however much you want to anonymize, and I'll do a free resume review for you on the stream throughout the month of February. And then let's see who else is online. So Chris is streaming, Bawana is streaming, Sympathy. Oh, we'll go raid Sympathy. Doing game development. Yeah, Sympathy's a great streamer. Loves doing some game development. So I'm going to set up that raid from here, and we'll get that going in a couple of minutes. Again, really appreciate everybody's time. Appreciate all the comments and stuff in chat. The chat was fantastic. Thank you, all of you, for sharing your perspectives and thoughts with one another as well. So we'll see you on Sunday at the same time. And until then, stay safe, stay warm, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ian. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks
Bye.
for